Welcome back to Flick Connection, where in less time than you normally spend scrolling for something to watch, I'm going to tell you about 20 of the absolute best Korean flicks you can currently catch on Netflix. But almost every single movie on this list has an excellent dubbed version if you don't like reading subtitles, with one or two exceptions, but right up here near the title, I'll be sure to let you know if it's subtitled only. This video is sponsored by Bespoke Post, but my number 20 pick on this list is a wild one. It's titled The Call, and this is a bit of a mix-up between something like Silence of the Lambs and Frequency, which was kind of a time travel movie starring Dennis Quaid. But instead of traveling through time, two women are actually able to communicate through the phone over two different time frames. This one's dark, twisted, it can be bloody at times, you get great serial killer elements. YungE plays the psycho in this movie. She does a killer job, and she stars in two other picks on this list that are ranked much higher. Next up, we've got an interesting take on the superhero genre. This one's titled Psychokinesis, and it's about a man that develops very strong psycho-telekinetic powers. As you can see from the trailer, he does some wild stuff with it, and the story is actually pretty cool here. He's trying to defend his neighborhood. This one's definitely a fun watch, though. While there are some somewhat heavy themes, it's fairly accessible. It's not an overly bloody or violent movie. All of the superpower effects are done in this fun way, and then the flavor of the movie overall has this distinctive South Korean touch that's funny and light, but also fairly compelling. Now, I've got plenty more excellent flicks on this list, but before talking about those, let's talk about today's sponsor, Bespoke Post. Bespoke Post is a monthly membership club delivering a box of awesome, always top shelf goods from under the radar brands. It's totally free to join and you can skip months anytime. And 90% of their products come from small brands, many of which are based right here in the US. Things like barware, home goods, kitchen goods, clothing, and a lot more. And it's always unique stuff that will make great gifts for you or for someone special in your life. And the selections they make for you is based on a preference quiz that you'll fill out when you first sign up. And every single box of awesome features about $70 worth of goods inside, but it'll cost you a fraction of that. Like this awesome duffel bag from the Weekender kit. It's not huge, but it's perfect for like an overnight or weekend trip. I've also been wearing hats a lot lately, but I live in Atlanta and I sweat through all of them and ruin my nice hats. These melon hats really stand up to that, but they're so expensive. I've yet to pony up with my own money, but I got a great one with Bespoke Post. I'm excited to sweat through this thing. In fact, the kit even came included with some athletic spray to help keep your hat and athletic wear clean. To get 20% off your first box of awesome, go to the link in the description and use my code FlickConnection20 at checkout, or just go to bespokepost.com/FlickConnection20. Each month you'll get a new box of awesome assigned to you, and you'll get to preview it so you can decide to keep it, swap it for something else, or skip the month entirely. Go to the link in the description. Don't forget to use my code FlickConnection20 to get that 20% discount. It's a great deal, but speaking of great stuff, let's talk about the rest of the movies on this list. Now, this is a very eclectic list. I've got a bunch of genres on it. We've got action, drama, comedy, but next I've got a sci-fi flick that came out this year titled YungE. This takes place in a dystopian future where robots have taken over, the wars in Terminator. That's basically what's unfolding here. Yet the scientists of the remaining human population are trying to develop a super soldier, but they're trying to do it using the mind of one of their most elite soldiers. Now, the movie itself has some cool action. It's all animated. It's got that Netflix original quality, but it is a cool sci-fi flick. On top of that, though, there are some fairly heavy themes that I thought this movie did a great job with. For a smaller Netflix original action movie, I was surprised actually how well some of the themes worked in this movie. Next up, we've got a fun one packed with action that's a totally different genre. It's titled The Pirates and is a full-blown pirate movie. But this is a strange one. It's got a bit of a Pirates of the Caribbean look and feel, a little bit lower budget, but I don't really mind that at all. But this too has a kind of a bizarre sense of humor, but in just a slightly strange way, where the movie's fairly serious and there's lots of action, and it's kind of what you would expect almost from an American blockbuster action movie. And then the sense of humor in it is really goofy in kind of a charming way. I enjoyed it. But my next pick is actually an early Netflix original movie. In fact, it was one of the first big Netflix original releases when they first started doing this. It is titled Oaka. This takes place in the near future, where these giant sort of hippo pig creatures have been engineered specifically as food. They grow big, they grow quickly, and they have a lot of tasty meat. They've been engineered that way. But the movie is about one of those creatures that is the pet of this young girl, and when it's taken away to be, turned into food, she goes after it. This is actually kind of a heartwarming story. It reminds me of things almost like Harry and the Hendersons, except it is more serious. This has an R rating. The themes it deals with can be a little bit too heavy, particularly for a family movie. The first movie on this list to feature a lot of actors you'll recognize, like Tilda Swinton. Jake Gyllenhaal plays a wild character in this. Paul Dano is great, and you've also got Steven Yeun, who is from South Korea and is in another movie featured higher up on this list as well. I've got two exceptional zombie flicks on this list. Next up, we've got #Alive. This one's only a couple of years old now and is unique in the zombie genre. Even if it gets fairly derivative towards the end, I still enjoyed the setup for #Alive. You follow one young man trapped in his apartment after a zombie outbreak. Eventually, he notices a girl across the way, and they're able to communicate with each other and try to formulate a plan to eventually escape what seems to be an inescapable scenario. Overall, this feels exactly like a zombie movie. It's pretty much what you would expect, but the scenario the main characters are in is just different enough to make this one an interesting watch. Next up, we've got something really unique, and it's a fairly recent release. It's titled Unlocked, and it's about a young woman who loses her phone, or at least it's hacked into, in a very interesting way. The way that's all presented is exceptional in this flick. And then what this psychopath does with access to her phone is insane. Things that never would have occurred to me. He's able to completely manipulate her life just by accessing her phone. He can communicate with people she knows, can post things on her behalf, and the amount of power that potentially gives someone is terrifying. But if you like twisted thrillers, The Call is certainly an interesting one. Okay, next up we've got an interesting one. This takes place in a dystopian future, a near future, but a world where government has collapsed, and a world that kind of reminds me of 1979's The Warriors. In A Time to Hunt, you follow a group of young men trying to kind of find their way through this dystopian world. They're essentially trying to raise enough money to leave this city where their life expectancy is fairly low. And to do so, they decide to knock off a casino, and they decide to knock off the wrong casino. But then in the aftermath of the heist, they get a hit put on them, and it's almost like No Country for Old Men. They've got a hitman coming after them that is relentless, that will not stop, and it makes for a really cool setup, and it goes into some directions you're not going to expect. We're not even to the middle of the list yet, and I can tell you, Time to Hunt is a total banger. Same goes for my next pick, which easily could have turned into a series. Maybe it still will. Killbox. This movie has an excellent opening sequence. If you're not into it within the first 10 minutes, the movie's maybe not for you. Here you follow a woman who's part of an assassination organization. There's nothing revolutionary there, but what makes Killbox so interesting is she's also a mother. She's also got a life outside of that seems fairly ordinary and busy, yet she's this elite assassin that helps train others. The school and everything in this movie was really cool. That's the main reason I would like to see a series based on this, because I could spend more time in this world. But also the other stuff in her life isn't just tacked on to explain that she's busy. That part of the story makes a lot of sense as well and is fully compelling. This is a cool flick, even though it's essentially in a genre and has a setup you've likely seen multiple times. There was enough in Killbox to make it fresh and interesting for me to place it right here in the center of this list. All right, now before jumping into my top 10, we're gonna round out my bottom 10 with far and away the most action-packed movie on this list, and easily one of the most action-packed Netflix original movies ever released, Carter. Now, if you were a fan of the movie Hardcore Henry, one I've recommended many times on this channel, you need to see Carter. It is done in a similar vein, and it is excellent. Here you follow a man who essentially wakes up with amnesia. He has no idea what's going on and gets thrust into an action movie from the start. This one's bloody, it's loud, it's violent. The camera stays with the main actor the entire film, and it's done in a way where it seems like one shot. Now, this is kind of a fast and loose action movie. The craft of the filmmaking here is not at the level of something like 1917, but it still makes for a wild, non-stop action movie that is just a lot of fun. But don't get me wrong, this one is brutal and bloody, and with a runtime of 2 hours and 12 minutes, there might be 12 minutes of downtime in this movie. There's that much action in it. I would honestly say, if you're not a fan of action movies, steer far clear of this one. It's going to make you dizzy, but if you love the genre and you somehow missed this one, especially if you've yet to discover movies from Korea, check this one out. It is a blast to watch. My next pick also has a lot of wild, over-the-top action towards its climax, but The Witch Subverting is actually a supernatural mystery thriller. I say supernatural, it's almost a bit more sci-fi. It can be fairly slow-paced at times, especially as it's establishing the story, but there's already a sequel that was just recently released. It is not on Netflix, but if you love The Witch Subverting, you could easily go rent that right now. Space Sweepers is a really fun sci-fi flick from South Korea. In fact, I was amazed at how good this was, especially for a Netflix original. And even though they were dealing with a small fraction of the same budget, I found this movie to be much more entertaining than any of the new Star Wars movies, maybe with the exception of Rogue One. That said, this is a cool, colorful action-adventure movie set in space. As I said at the beginning, this one has a great dubbed version like most of the movies on this list. There's some excellent humor in this. In fact, out of everything on this list, I've mentioned how different the flavor can be on a lot of these. Space Sweepers feels the most like a big budget American movie. It feels like Guardians of the Galaxy or something. Now, as you can tell, South Korea is absolutely killing it in a variety of genres, but one that I think they have been doing just some incredible work with for decades now is the gangster movie genre. My next pick being a superb example, Night in Paradise. Now, this too is a Netflix original movie, and it is a slow burn, so maybe don't make it the first one you watch if you typically don't dig slow burn movies. But this is a moody, slick gangster flick. It can be pretty violent at times, but it's not that way throughout the entire movie. In this movie, you follow a gangster who's trying to hide out after something goes wrong, essentially trying to evade capture. He knows people are after him, and he hides out on this little island and actually connects with this woman, and so you get kind of some high drama elements through the middle of the movie, but it ultimately is also a pretty hard-hitting gangster movie. Like I said, it's got a slow pace to it. There's a great villain in this one. In fact, that goes for a lot of these movies. They have fantastic bad guys, much better than a lot of American movies. They tend to be more sinister in kind of a really cool way, and Night in Paradise is another great example of that. Steven Yeun shows up again in my next pick. It's titled Burning. This is one of the more interesting movies on this list, but it's also one of the slower paced movies on this list. And honestly, the less you know about this one, the better. And I'll tell you, it does take quite a while for Burning to give you any sort of clue as to where it's going. But in the end, I do think it's well worth it. Not only is there a payoff and the story is ultimately worth it, but the performances are all fantastic. Steven Yeun is amazing in this. I mean, legitimately, I think it might be his best role. And then Young Seo is also in this as well. She's fantastic, and then she's featured again in another pick closer to the #1 spot, making her maybe my favorite actor on this list right now. All right, my next recommendation is almost two recommendations. That's because my next pick actually has a sequel releasing on Netflix any day now. But Believer is a crime flick from 2018 that is kind of an organized crime undercover movie with some wild twists and turns. In fact, there are multiple scenes in this movie that are just a little bit over the top in a way that I loved. I mean, here you've got some of the most sinister villains in a straightforward crime movie I've ever seen, and quite a few surprising twists and turns throughout. This felt kind of like a big budget American crime movie, but again, with this slightly different touch that just made all the difference for me. In fact, this movie felt a lot like something I loved but had seen quite a few times, and they dialed it up to 11 in just the right way that made it really compelling and much more interesting than this genre tends to be these days. But the sequel, Believer 2, is getting released in the US as a Netflix original on November 17th, just 2 days after releasing this episode. So if you love Believer, definitely check out the sequel. I have not seen it yet, but it looks like it's action-packed. And then speaking of action-packed, my next pick is a 2023 release, and it's one of my favorite Netflix original movies I've seen all year. It too stars YungE, and it's titled Ballerina. Now, even though it looks like this one's not really about an assassin, there's kind of a slightly different twist with the character here that made all the sense in the world. In fact, I loved the way they presented this character. Female-led action movies are often written and choreographed the same way you would do for a man, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Ballerina does several things differently that make all the difference in the world and make this feel much more grounded and realistic, even though the atmosphere of Ballerina is kind of dreamy in almost this neo-noir kind of way, which I'm a sucker for. I love the aesthetic of this movie. The soundtrack is really cool. The bad guy is excellent. The twists and turns are different and unique. And even though it is an action movie, I'll say it's not loaded with action, but when the action does pop off, it's almost John Wick level at times, making that stuff excellent. And then the core story and everything driving all of that action has a lot more meat to it than you typically get from this genre. All right, now we're into my final four. And next up, we've got a really creepy one that would have made an amazing Halloween watch. It's titled The Wailing. In this movie, a small village is ravaged by this very mysterious disease, almost kind of a zombification. This is not a zombie movie, though. Essentially, people begin to go crazy and start killing everyone in their home or village. But it's not this crazy supernatural horror movie. It's actually a very good mystery flick. You're actually following a cop trying to uncover what's going on, but what makes this so interesting is he's really not very capable. He's got a lot of problems, he's not that smart, and he has a lot of trouble solving this mystery, but he's insanely determined because his daughter has begun to display a lot of the symptoms of this disease. This one too is loaded with twists and turns. It's hard to tell where it's going up to the final moments, and it's just a total thrill ride with, again, some really creepy elements. Okay, my number 3 pick is a really cool pick. I really would love everyone watching this video to check out Veteran. However, it's one of the few on this list that does not have a good dubbed version, so that is going to eliminate some of you. That said, this is an excellent cop movie. It's not something they really make that much in the US anymore, but this one doesn't have any supernatural elements, no sci-fi, not a ton of action, but when it does have action, it's fairly grounded and realistic. Here you follow a detective kind of going toe-to-toe with the leader of this organized crime group. But the detective is kind of fun. He really enjoys his job. He's got a very interesting personality, and that's what elevates this movie so much. Not just him, but again, you've got a villain in Veteran that is just top-notch, really kind of evil and twisted, and the performances of these villains is just, again, it's not way over the top. They know how to just dial it up just enough to make it flavorful and interesting, and that's what you get with Veteran. Just a really cool cop flick that's a little light and fun, but also is a little grungy at times as well. Totally my kind of movie. If you've already been into some movies from South Korea and you don't mind reading subtitles, this is going to be one of my top picks off the list for you, as you can tell by where it's placed. And then my top 2 on this list just so happens both take place on trains. My next pick being a true blue zombie flick and one of my favorites of all time, Train to Busan. Now, if you've never heard of this one almost feels like it's happening in the same world as World War Z. Feels like it's happening almost at the same timeline. You follow mostly a father and daughter, even though there's quite a few other characters on this train, but they're going on a train to the city of Busan when this zombie outbreak occurs, and they essentially become trapped on this train, or anytime they try to leave the train, it proves to be impossible. So yeah, it's zombies on a train, and it works, not just because that's an interesting scenario, but the character development is fantastic. You're rooting for them all the way through. There's a lot of touching elements to this as well without being overly gushy, making for just an exciting thrill ride of a zombie movie. This is actually a movie I've watched with mixed company several times, and every single time people rave about how much they love this movie, including in the comments section here on the channel. This has been one of my most highly recommended movies here on the channel over the years, so if you love zombie flicks, you want to discover some Korean action, Train to Busan is going to be the way to go. But my number one pick actually has the least sort of South Korean flavor, but I still consider it to be the best flick on the entire list. It's actually from the same director as Oaka and the Academy Award-winning movie Parasite. I'm talking about Snowpiercer.
1,000 people in an iron box. 18 years I've hated a train. 18 years I've waited for this moment.
Now yes, I know this is probably the most well-known movie on this list, but it does come from South Korea, and most of it's in English, because the lead here is actually Chris Evans, Tilda Swinton has a huge role, Ed Harris. This is a wild thrill ride. The train obviously serves as a metaphor, and it works for me. I think it's all really interesting. This one's also just a really wild ride, has the best production value out of anything on this entire list, making it the biggest, baddest movie. Not exactly why it's the number one pick, but it's still worth noting. But that is the list. Don't forget to check out the bespoke post link in the video description below, but I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thank you for checking out this special South Korean episode, and you will see me on the next one.